Welcome to the Rising Podcast. I'm your host, Torisheju Omagbemi, and today we are here to demystify cybersecurity. We want to also explore the realities for African organizations. How are they interfacing with cybersecurity and all the nuances? We want to also spotlight the growing opportunities in the space. Cybersecurity, it's a word we hear often, but how deeply do we really understand it? For many organizations, especially those that operate in the continent of Africa, it's still treated like an afterthought. Sometimes, businesses are, right, instead of being proactive, are reactive to the issues, events, activities that relate to cybersecurity. For some of these organizations, they're just thinking, this is something IT can handle quietly, in the background. But in today's world, cybersecurity is no longer just about protection. It is about resilience. It's about continuity. It's about strategy. Today, we have a wonderful guest on the Horizon podcast. His name is Sadiq Nasir. Sadiq is a technology expert. Precisely, he's a technology executive as well as a business executive with over 2 decades of successfully delivering IT projects and helping different businesses enhance their processes, and he thrives working in challenging environments. Quite a number of very important contributions Sadiq has made in the academic space. You know, um, he has published several academic conference papers as well as contributing to book chapters. Sadiq, you're welcome on the Rhizome podcast.
Thank you very much.
We will dive straight into the conversation. Quite a number of things to cover today. I think it is okay to start on a personal note, Sadiq. So, how did you journey into cybersecurity? Um, and what has kept you going? So, that's a two-in-one question, and you have the floor to respond to that, Sadiq. Over.
All right. Thank you for that question. So in the 90s, at the beginning, we had access to a computer from my dad's office.
Mm,
So time and again, we just used to go and play around with computers. And then eventually we end up getting one at home.
mm,
So these are the days of the dial-up. Dial-ups are essentially what you use to connect to the internet. Unlike today, where you have the mobile phones that can do hotspots directly and you have
right.
Wi-Fi readily available. So I think that was my early experience and interaction with computers. Then came time for university. So my dad had an idea that, okay, the future is perhaps somewhere within technology, but he wasn't quite sure of the way to go about it. And one of the first things was he said, okay, I've got a friend who's a bank manager and he has vast experience in technology, etc., etc. So let's go to him, a bit of mentorship session.
Mm,
And I would never forget that 30, 40 minutes conversation. Never. Like it still rings in my head till today. He tells me, look, forget about architecture, forget everything else, just focus on computing, just focus on technology. Whatever you're studying has to like be a technology-based course. And I said, okay, fine, 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 that's good. So really, that's how I got into doing my first degree, which was in computing, and then did a master's in that same field several years later. But later after graduation, I started hearing about this word cybersecurity. I mean, then it was really, really very much new. I
right.
said, okay. So I started doing a bit of research. What is the cybersecurity? I later found out that it's exactly what I've been doing, protecting systems, networks, etc., computers. That it was just new, but because it was a new domain that was shooting off of computer science and a bit of computer engineering, so it was very much new in that time. So
Mm,
since then, there has been constant evolution of the space, and more courses are being shoot off from that domain. So more specifically, to localize the experience, the federal government sat down a few years ago and decided to break computer science at HND level, at OND level, into several courses, and cybersecurity was one of them. So the idea is, you can see that there is dichotomy in
Right.
this domain. Like, there's more areas popping up because technology is changing constantly and is continuously evolving. So I was lucky to be a part of those that was invited to come have a look at the curriculum
Right.
plan, the HND programs and the OND programs. So I sat down with a couple of experts, tried to see, okay, what kind of textbooks do we need? What kind of tools do we need? What level of cybersecurity do you need at that level? And that was the beginning of a journey in cybersecurity for most people doing such programs. And I've been lucky to have a similar experience here and there, trying to be in the forefront of the conversations around, okay, what's going on, what's the future like, and in a very, very dynamic field. I mean, like, it's such a dynamic field that someone that graduates from university today
Mm-hmm.
has the capacity to teach you something that you've been doing for 30 years. So that's how very
Right.
dynamic this field is, because there are so many tools and techniques for doing similar things. So it's opened up that conversation as to, okay, what's really going on here? Because there's so many areas. In fact, there are over 50 different career paths within the conversation of cybersecurity. So it's a
Wow.
very, very interesting domain. So that's what I've been up to, and that's how I go into the domain of cybersecurity.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sadiq. I think that's a very good note to keep the conversation going. I mean, having over 50 career path in the domain of cybersecurity is, I see that as a huge opportunity to tap in. And then for young champs who are trying to make a decision, I mean, what path should I toe? Um, Perhaps not even sure if it is cybersecurity at all, or maybe in the cybersecurity space, not sure. You have 50. I think that's a lot of options to pick from, and I think that's a good thing. So Sadiq, in your years of working in the space, what's been the biggest misconception you think businesses operating in the African region still have about cybersecurity? Over.
So the general approach has been, cybersecurity is not important until it's become important. So what that means is, a lot of people feel, well, why should I invest training my staff, bringing them up to speed? Why should I invest on a firewall? Why should I invest on a VPN, for example? Why should I do all this? And that has been the general approach. So it's more of reactive. We just wait until something happens, then we begin to move around like headless chicken, trying to make sense out of the situation. And because of the complex nature of cybersecurity, sometimes organizations feel that, okay, they put maybe X amount, they expect to be able to rip out that same amount immediately. But it doesn't quite work like that. It's all about, scaling up your defenses. So for instance, simply because you have like in your house, simply because you have an access door which you
Right.
lock, doesn't mean that you should not have a burglary proof. It doesn't mean that you should leave your main gate open. It doesn't mean that you should not put a security guard. It doesn't mean that the estate itself should not have a security guard. It doesn't mean that you should not have cameras. So where I'm going with this is, that there are layers to this approach. There should be layers to this approach. Simply because a thief has never visited your estate does not mean that you should not invest in safeguarding your perimeter, premises. So the
Yes.
same with cybersecurity, because we've not been hacked before, doesn't mean that we should not invest in training of our staff. We should not invest in antivirus, etc., etc., etc. So generally, people are a bit reluctant towards cybersecurity because it's a very expensive domain. What I mean by expensive, it's there's a lot of activities that require resource allocation. And coming from a developing economy such as Nigeria, people tend to prioritize more untangible stuff that they could see almost immediately,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like okay, like they focus more on branding, etc., etc. But they always forget that cybersecurity is actually an essential part of
Mm.
the business because the
Right.
truth is, if you invest so much in your infrastructure, building everything else, and neglect cybersecurity, one cybersecurity incident can literally throw out everything you've done. And when an incident happens, it tends to be an embarrassment for most organizations. So you see this culture of cover up. Oh, they say, oh, it's not that bad. Because we've seen it on newspaper publications. Whenever a cybersecurity incident happens, they are quick to go to the media and say, "Oh no, no, it was not a data breach. It was just like they find it a
Right.
convenient excuse." But but because it's embarrassing,
Yes.
no one wants to be dragged in on the streets for cybersecurity incident. But as a mitigative strategy to this, some countries actually make it mandatory for you
Mm-hmm.
to report to the relevant authorities when an incident happens. So that way, the issue can be looked at more closely, like from a broader perspective. And
Mm.
I think in Nigeria, we need to start looking at that as well, where we
Right.
have this enforcement and compliance. And so, okay, look, if a cybersecurity incident happens and you happen to leak customers' data or money has been stolen through a cybersecurity incident, there should be like regulatory compliance that force people to
Right.
report this incident. Why? Because we need to show these people that look, we're a serious country, and Nigeria is not a country that any human being can just come and do anything they like.
Right.
Because recently we've seen an influx of foreign nationals
Mm-hmm.
come into Nigeria and then carry out cybersecurity incidents, and it's becoming more and more increasing and worrying. And the problem with that is whenever an incident happens and an IP address, that's the name of the computer, is tracked down to Nigeria,
Mm.
it doesn't show up that, oh, it's a Philippines or is Indonesian or whatever. No, no, no. What's carried on is an IP address that's the name of the computer that is originating from Nigeria. So it has to be a Nigerian. And that in turn gives us a bad reputation. And you present your green, beautiful passport to another
Yeah.
country trying to travel, to explore the world, and then they tell you no. And then you start wondering, what have I done?
Mm. Right.
Someone flew to Nigeria, committed an atrocities, and then the world thinks that it's Nigerian. I mean, on this on a global scale, if you look at the people that commit these cybersecurity breaches and whatnot, you discover that Nigeria is really at the bottom of the indices. But because Nigeria has been seen as a safe haven by some of these threat actors. They keep flooding to Nigeria, but I think we just need to have more conversations around how do we fish these people out? How do we prevent this
Absolutely.
from happening? But that's
Ab-
not to say that Nigerians are not involved. Sure, there are Nigerians that are involved, but the truth is the narrative is not always as bad as it's been pushed out in the
Right.
publications. Yes.
Right. I mean, good points you've made, and that brings me to my sets the tone for the next question because I was going to ask you to say beyond talking about this at an operations level,
Mhm.
where perhaps um you're purchasing something or employing somebody. Um, do you think that the conversation around cybersecurity should be taken to the top of leadership at boardrooms, um, in the public sector, private sector, at government? Top leaders should be having conversations about cybersecurity rather than just it being one IT checklist item. Over.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting point of view you've pointed out. Traditionally, cybersecurity is something that has been left to the IT department to handle. But if
Mm.
you look at the bigger picture, it's actually beyond the boardrooms. It's something that needs to happen at the policy level, like from the federal government standpoint. And Nigerian government has been trying their best in coming up with cybersecurity strategy, which is being reviewed every 5 years, I believe. And that's a start. So once we start from there, we then begin to operationalize those strategic documents to bring it down. So you see, there needs to be more adoption in terms of what the various government agencies are doing in terms of cybersecurity, and then taking it down to the private organizations. There needs to be board level conversations around what is the cybersecurity? How does it affect us? Why should we bother?
Mhm.
Why we as a management of a private organization, why should we invest in it? Why should we provide budgetary allocation? Why should we provide the necessary trainings to train our staff to this level? So what I'm trying to say by this is by the time we begin to have these conversations, then the management of or the board level of several organizations can now begin to think strategically around creating these resource allocations, creating this necessary training, and supporting every other program that needs to happen within various organizations. And this is it's not something that should happen just as a one-off. It's something that should happen perhaps at every board meeting for organizations to decide, okay, what are the current trends? What are the challenges, what are the opportunities, like a comprehensive SWOT analysis. And then given their current budget, then they can decide how much they want to allocate.
Right.
And interestingly, I've written a book, or rather a book chapter in this in 2022 to 2023. The
Mm.
book it was centered around this same thing where it's asking critical questions. What decision leaders need to know about cybersecurity? Okay, I
Mm.
wrote this in conjunction with one of my professors from the university. So, in the book, we talked about different aspects that leadership should know because when it comes to the conversations around cybersecurity, a lot of my colleagues tend to go really hardcore on it. So what I mean by hardcore is they tend to use a lot of vocabularies, and this
Mm.
leaves people at the boardroom left out of the
Yeah.
conversation.
Right.
Yeah, so because what you can't go to a board meeting and then you start telling them, oh, the VPN this, and you start calling all sorts of vocabulary that cannot relate. So it's our responsibility, us in the industry, to be able to break down this concept of cybersecurity to a very manageable chunk that every manager and every board of director can relate to. So once everybody can relate, then they can know that, okay, hang on, cybersecurity is actually a shared responsibility. I have a role to play. So, for example, from the chairmans of the boards in every organization, they have a role to play down to the least person in terms of the organizational hierarchy. This might
Right.
be the cleaners, this might be the security personnel within that organization. Everybody has a role to play in cybersecurity. So, and when organizations carry out trainings for cybersecurity and create awareness, we tend to leave out people in the boardrooms out of it. We tend to leave out people in the lower cadres of organizations, such as the cleaners and the other individuals in this bottom of the pyramid. And what that does is this can be a source of vulnerability to that organization because for every board of director that is not really on board on what cybersecurity is in terms of understanding the peripheral concept, in terms of understanding the reason why they have to create this budgetary provision, they will not support the movement for
Right.
like the fundamentals. And then
Right.
also the security guard, if he is not on board in terms of the training programs that are involved within the organization, they can actually be your source of vulnerability because in the concept of cybersecurity, the human aspect is the weakest link.
Mm.
What that means is all it takes is one human being to break down an entire network infrastructure. And this has happened over and over again, ranging from big organizations that have multi-billion dollar budget to small organizations, SMEs that are found in our various marketplaces in, doing their carrying out their business. That human being must not be neglected. Everybody must come on board. So to summarize your answer, we need to be able to carry out people at the board level, carry them along within this domain of cybersecurity, let them understand their level in terms of their responsibility with respect to making budgetary provisions, providing the organization with every single thing that is required to make the necessary decisions so that we can have a more robust cybersecurity culture.
Great. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Sadiq. I mean, it's coming out clear that, yeah, board level conversation needs to happen as well as at the policy level. And then there's the responsibility of the expert and subject matter experts in the cybersecurity space to make the conversations around cybersecurity very relatable for board members, to avoid all the jargons and all the technicalities so that board members are carried along and they understand how this relates to high-level decisions and then trickles down to the very everyday hands-on activities that the organization carry out. Very good thoughts, Sadiq. So I also understand that you have seen the front lines. You have seen these incidents happen at different scale. Can you walk us through what typically is happening back end and how is this manifesting front end when some of these attacks, happen in a bank, on a cloud server, on a government facility, what typically how is this pretty much playing out back end and then front end, just so that people get an understanding of this is really happening and this is how it typically would, play out and the vulnerabilities that exist. Over.
Okay. To put it in simple terms, so imagine a bank staff working, carrying out his daily job, and then he receives an email. In that email, it has a phishing link. So what a phishing link is think of it as an email from an evil intent actor. Okay. So by the time he clicks on that link, the if if it's an email that has a malware, for instance. So a malware is basically codes that are written by an evil intent person with evil intent. So that runs in the background
Mm-hmm.
and opens up the relevant ports, or might even install a software within the computer. So what when that happens, this is a typical scenario I'm just trying to relate. So
Right.
that opens up a gateway where the person that developed the solution is able to access that network infrastructure that the email was opened up with. I mean,
Mm.
the bank staff is just innocent. He's just doing his job. Perhaps he's expecting an email from the management staff, so that's a typical way these things happen. And another scenario might be that someone's walk into the office premise and
Right.
then leaves a flash drive lying about, or he accesses one of the computers and then plugs in a flash drive, noting that this flash drive might be infested with malware. And that flash drive would create the gateway needed for the threat actor to be able to jump into that network. So typically that's how it happens. I mean, there are several ways these things happen, but
Yes.
typically this is how these things happen. And when they happen, it's not as glamorous as we see in the movies with
Hmm.
respect to, oh, the bank, the IT guys come in,
Yeah.
click on the keyboard,
Mm-hmm.
press one of the things, and then run some test and something, and it goes off. Sometimes it beats the IT guy. Sometimes it's more complicated. Sometimes it's a virus or a malware that no one has seen before, you know? So to give you a specific context, a few years ago, there was this WannaCry attack that was carried out around the world. So what that happened, what happened then was all the computers were locked out, those that were infested with this virus, and then you were required to pay ransom to be able to gain access to your data. And for the people that paid the ransom, I don't think any one of them got their data back.
Oh, wow.
So in the end, it was an individual that said, okay, look, all the traffic that is being directed is being sent to a particular IP address, and
Hmm.
then he created a new domain name that's a new web address to redirect the traffic. And that was really the end of how this WannaCry virus came. So typically that's how they operate. And sometimes the solution might not be as that straightforward in the sense that you do one or two things and you find a way
Hmm.
around it. Sometimes you have to actually format the computers, that the important thing is better to try to find a preventive approach because when it happens, oh, there's a lot in play because sometimes you
Right.
have to start going into reverse engineering. You have to
Mm.
isolate that computer to actually understand what really happened or what's going on in that computer. And in that time that we're having, you're trying to resolve all this, the organization is experiencing downtime.
Hmm.
All the customers that are being provided the necessary service are being denied of their service. And people will be wondering, okay, what's going on? What's going on? Why can't I just access the service? Not knowing that um, the organization has been hit by a virus or malware. So that's typically the scenario. And then afterwards, when you look at the amount of time you have spent, that organization-wise depends on the level of infection, depends on the level of damage that was done.
Right.
You discover that a lot of man hours, a lot of money has been spent and this is not a case that happens just in Nigeria. We've seen it pretty much in every single country. We've seen it in Saudi Arabia, we've seen it in the US, we've seen it in the United Kingdom, and these things keep happening and they keep happening. So, but the important thing is to just figure out ways to just improve the skill set of our relevant teams within organization to see how best we can minimize this because when an incident is about to happen, because we are better prepared, that means the damage would be less in terms of the impact, in terms of the reputational damage to the organization, in terms of financial loss, in terms of every ramification. So that's a
Yeah.
typical scenario of what
Right.
happens when an organization gets hit. And
Yeah.
then that's not even the limit of it.
Hmm.
Sometimes these viruses spread. Okay,
Mm.
they spread from one computer to another, they spread from one network to another. So just imagine in that particular incident where I tell you that someone comes in with a flash drive
Hmm.
and then he finishes his work, takes that virus, gives it to his friend or takes it home, plugs it to another computer, and then the virus spread continues.
Mm.
So sometimes this virus can spread like wildfire. So it's important to just find out, okay, what are the best strategies given our limited resources as an organization, and how do we deploy this effectively? And it's important for organizations to remember that all these solutions that are being deployed should not be a one-off solution. So,
Right.
because you are training your organization's staff in cybersecurity awareness, it shouldn't just be, oh, last year we did it, so next year there's no need. No, it's something that you have to do continuously because human beings, we tend to forget. Once you train someone, you have to come back and give him a refresher. So given that in that process, it helps consolidate the learning.
Hmm.
And some organizations tend to adopt scenario or gamification where
Hmm.
they turn this cybersecurity knowledge or knowledge acquisition through gaming. So you expose your staff to learning cybersecurity through gamification, and in that process, it helps solidify the learning. So the idea is to
Absolutely.
approach it from a from a various standpoint where you have this continuous training. So maybe it might be one physical training every year and then another virtual training through maybe any of these available training course platforms such as Coursera. So these are some of the strategies that we can take to prevent or rather reduce the incidents, the
Right.
sizes of the incidents when they occur.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sadiq. Uh, there's a growing distinction, right, between cyber resilience and cybersecurity. I'm not sure many people pretty much understand this distinction. So, would you just define, in the context of our conversation, what does resilience, in practical terms, what does this mean, especially for organizations in Nigeria and other parts of Africa?
So, cyber resilience is basically the ability of an organization to prepare and to respond to cybersecurity attack when it happens. So, to give you a simple context or practical example, in every organization, you have a security guard, like I've mentioned to you earlier. In addition to a security guard, you actually have lock in various offices. In addition to that, you should back up your files offsite. So, for example, the organization can decide to have all their sensitive documents in a cloud storage somewhere outside that premise, or they can decide to have a physical backup within that office. So all this helps define what we call resilience. So in case they're hit by a virus or a malware, they can easily recover quickly. So this is what it means by resilient.
Yeah.
How quick the organization can be able to prepare
Right.
and respond to a cybersecurity attack, and then of course the backup systems that they have in place. And when it comes to backup, it's very important not to have all your eggs in one basket. So what
Yeah.
that means is if you have your physical computers in the office, you should consider a cloud storage off the office premise. This can be as affordable as a Google space, that Google Drive,
Hmm.
or a more secured, encrypted backup offsite. So in case that the organization gets hit, the organization can quickly recover. Then, of course,
Right.
organizations need to have a policy around how frequent they carry out backups. Is it daily? Is it hourly? It depends on the velocity of the information coming in and the
Hmm.
volume of data. But it's important to be able to have backup. So all this I've said together defines what organizational resilience towards cybersecurity means.
Means, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, the tech space has been booming for what, the last 30 years, different domain popping up here and there, like you shared at the beginning of this conversation. So for many young Nigerians interested in tech, but maybe cybersecurity seems intimidating, what skills, maybe certifications or pathways, would you suggest that they consider over?
The domain of cybersecurity is one that has uh, a low barriers of entry. So what I mean by that specifically is a domain that welcomes everybody. So you might have studied public policy, you might have studied civil engineering, you might have studied law, you might even have studied computer science. So you can still come into cybersecurity. And so having set the background for like what you have or what you don't have,
Hmm.
the next thing is how do you get into cybersecurity? There are several ways to it. When you look at the industry, there are several proprietary vendor-based certifications and trainings. So for example, we have CompTIA that makes Security Plus.
Yeah.
This is a basic foundational knowledge towards what security is. Then we have Certified Information System Security Professionals. That's a CISSP. This is another entry level, or rather, can be considered as an entry level towards cybersecurity. Then we have the Certified Ethical Hacker.
Hmm.
These are all training programs that are readily available. So, how do you decide what areas to jump into? Well, one of the things is you can start reading up on the various domains within cybersecurity. You can look at incident response, being a SOC analyst, and then the various aspects within cybersecurity to see if there is anyone that can align with your current background because it's a lot
Right.
easier to build up based on your background. So if you are a lawyer, for example, you might decide to go, okay, pick up law. I mean, you decide to pick up that law within cybersecurity, as an example. So these are some of the most common certification programs that one can take.
Mm,
And
mm,
knowledge right now has become really readily available to us. So all you need right now is data on your mobile device, and then
mm-hmm.
you go onto YouTube. And on YouTube, you'd see various tutorials around the various certification programs like I've mentioned, such as Security Plus, the Ethical Hacker, the CISSP. There's a lot of tutorials that you can actually watch step-by-step approach on how you can learn. It
Right.
helps with learning. And then, of course, we have the proprietary ones where you can go to Coursera and pay for some of these courses that if you prefer the paid one, because sometimes the paid ones are actually better for learning. Then a level above that is you can look for schools online that offer cybersecurity trainings. So
Mm,
sometimes these live programs are better because it promotes interaction, whereby when you compare to the YouTube videos, they're mostly static. So some people prefer that. So as an individual, everyone needs to look at their learning strategy. Some people prefer to learn alongside someone one-on-one, face-to-face,
mm-hmm.
But one has to look at his learning, like how
Preference.
quickly, yeah. And then of course the best would be to go to a physical training where you have an instructor and then you go for any of these training programs
Right.
to see based on what they offer. And then an important thing I need to mention that a lot of these training programs can be costly. So you need to look at your budgetary provisions to see which ones you can afford. And doing Security Plus doesn't mean that you are done.
Mm,
Cybersecurity is an ongoing profession that you need to keep learning every day because there are different tools, different strategies to achieving the same objective. So, but the more you learn, the better you get. And then when you have this foundational knowledge, you can decide to say, okay, look, fine, I've got this knowledge. How do I practicalize it? How do I uh, build an experience? One of the best ways to do it is through internship. So if you can
mm,
find an organization where you can practice some of these skills, and some of these organizations might even be welcome, might even welcome newbies where they train you alongside you carrying out a real hands-on practicals. So
right.
that's good if one can gain access to that. But above everything else, I think practice is important because cybersecurity is consistently and continuously changing,
Right.
especially with the advent of artificial intelligence.
Mm,
It's really, really changing the way things are done, the way the threat actors are able to create a virus quickly, more efficiently, viruses that are more accurate. And then, of course, on the good side, you can actually use this generative AI to learn. Okay, that's
mm,
if this kind of learning strategy is your type of thing. So where you
mm-hmm.
can sit down with ChatGPT and say, okay, look, hey ChatGPT, can you give me a step-by-step approach to learning ethical hacking, for instance,
Right.
assuming the role of my instructor. And then if you can learn in that fashion, it can actually be a learning process. So it's called learning by prompting, where you
Mm-hmm.
prompt and then you learn and you prompt. But this is largely centered around an individual knowing his capacity, knowing how best they learn, and then you try to walk up that ladder. Then an important thing to bring up here is mentorship.
Mm,
Mentorship is very, very key because sometimes some people might not find it easy to just pick up a course and then start doing. Sometimes you need to speak to industry professionals from different backgrounds to say, okay, look, these are the areas I'm trying to look at within cybersecurity. What do you think? Where do you see cybersecurity in the next 5 years? I'm coming from this background, that background. How well do you think I fit? do you want another question to ask yourself is, do you want to fit into an organizational structure
Mm,
when you have studied cybersecurity, or do you want to go into freelance? Because cybersecurity gives you both options where you can be a professional where independently doing
right.
freelance organizations, and there are a lot of platforms such as Upwork and so many others that you can actually, once you're a professional, you know your onions, you can go and learn, you can go and practice your craft and
Right.
get paid for it. So it just depends on what individual wants to do. But an important concept is just to talk to people in the industry, find out what are the opportunities, where what states, for example, what states within Abuja within Nigeria has the bulk of the opportunities, and then how do you leverage on that? So it helps to have a mentor that would give you a guide.
Mm. Right. Thank you so much, Sadiq. I mean, I think it's safe to say, sadly, we have to draw the curtain here because of the want of time. It's been my pleasure having this conversation with you, and thank you, I mean, for also pulling back the curtain on a world most people only hear about after it's too late. For me, I think that the conversation we've had today is a reminder that, in this digital era, protection when it comes to cyber security or cyber resilience, it's not just about all of the technicalities and all of the budgetary, and it's very strategic. At the enterprise level, at the public sector, governments, private sector level, it's very strategic. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Horizon podcast, I encourage you to not forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And also, don't forget to share it with a colleague or with a friend or with your family. And until next time, stay secure, stay informed. Thank you. Bye now.